Are the Houthis terrorists or not? That's a fantastic question that you may be asking. I know I am certainly asking that. And in the eyes of the UN, multiple countries are starting to get confused by the fact that the United States goes back and forth on this topic. And it's important to understand because there's so much more at stake here than just what's happening in Yemen. There's more at stake here than what's happening in Israel. Really, what's happening here is so much larger because we are looking at a very real global issue that could define what the future looks like in terms of global definitions of terrorism. Now, as a quick primer on what's going on in Yemen, there's been a civil war raging since 2014 that is predominantly being played out between the existing government of Yemen and a rebel group known as the Houthis. Now, the Houthis have been heavily backed by Iran. They're in many ways considered to be an Iranian support or an Iranian proxy group, meaning that they're taking funding, training, weapons from Iran and using that in their conflict against the Yemeni government. Now, Saudi Arabia has been involved, the United Arab Emirates have been involved, multiple American allies in the Middle East have all been involved in trying to combat the Houthis in Yemen. And since 2014, they have primarily pulled out, because it's very difficult to fight in Yemen and it's very difficult to defeat the Houthis because there is such popular support for the Houthis inside Yemen itself. Now, Yemen is actually the poorest country in the entire Middle East. Some of you may be surprised to even hear that Middle Eastern countries can be poor, because we know that most of the natural resources, most of the oil, most of the energy for the world comes from the Middle East. But in fact, there are many countries in the Middle East that don't have oil or don't have a way of reaching oil, and Yemen is one of those countries. Not only is Yemen the poorest country in the Middle East, Yemen also pulls one of the largest amounts of humanitarian aid directly from the UN and from the United States. The United States has given more than $5.5 billion in humanitarian aid to Yemen since 2015. So you and I have given more than $5.5 billion in taxpayers' dollars from the United States to the Yemeni people, who seem to prefer the Houthis over their own internal government in what is one of the most poverty-stricken and difficult places to live in the Middle East. That's the backdrop that we find ourselves looking at right now, with U.S. warships and airstrikes happening against Houthi rebel sites throughout Yemen, with merchant vessels that are under constant threat in the Red Sea from Houthi drones, unmanned surface warfare vehicles or unmanned boats that are carrying bombs basically throughout the Red Sea, and incredible US and UK focus on combating what are now being reconsidered terrorist organizations, and incredible US and UK resources being put into combating this Houthi threat to maritime transit in the Red Sea. Now, the Houthis are claiming that they only really want to stop or prevent traffic through the Red Sea that is going in support of Israel. That their claim, the Houthis themselves are claiming that they stand in support of Palestine and they are fighting the humanitarian crisis that's occurring in Israel in terms of the bombings of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. So the Houthis are claiming that their rationale for blocking traffic, for attacking maritime vessels with drones and improvised weapons, is that they want to show some sort of backing or resolute stand, some protection of the innocent Palestinians dying in Israel. So they're trying to block resources from getting to Israel to carry out those bombardment and that continuing attack. The United States, however, is deeming the Houthis' attacks as acts of terrorism. Now, here's where the rubber really meets the road. Now, before I explain exactly what's going on in terms of defining the Houthis as terrorists, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor. Many thanks to our sponsor for today's content, Aura. Aura is a fantastic company. They are a cybersecurity company that is designed to support the everyday person. So it's a cybersecurity company you carry on your phone. It's a cybersecurity company you carry on your laptop. It's a cybersecurity company that you share with your entire family. Now, one of the functions that I think is most powerful about Aura is that they have identity protection, and they actually have a way of scrubbing your information from data brokers that take your private information and resell it through the open internet, both in the dark web and on the publicly available internet. So if you want a way to make sure that your identity online is safe, the identity of your children and your wife is safe online, make sure you check out Aura and visit the link in the description below, or go to aura.com/everydayspy to take advantage of a complimentary 2-week offer so you can see firsthand how powerful it is to really have comfort and peace of mind in your digital world, in your pocket all the time. My thanks to Aura. We've been using Aura for over a year, and I can't wait for you to take advantage of their offer and see how it works for you. Now, when it comes to defining the Houthis in Yemen as a terrorist group, things get sticky. Now, let me start walking you through a little bit of the legal definitions here that are at play. First, there are two primary definitions in the United States for terrorists, and maybe you didn't know that. The first is called FTO, or Foreign Terrorist Organization. Now, in order for something to be deemed a foreign terrorist organization, or an FTO, it has to be an organization that meets certain criteria that specifically threaten U.S. national security. That's what it means to be FTO. So ISIS met those standards. Al-Qaeda meets those standards. There are multiple organizations. There are a long list of recognized terrorist organizations, recognized FTOs, that meet the list, according to the U.S. Department of State, of threatening U.S. national security. In 2021, the Houthis were removed from that list. So under the Biden administration, the Houthis were removed from that list, even though they were still on that list during the Trump administration. But the Biden administration decided to take them off the list because they no longer posed a threat to U.S. national security. Now, fast forward from 2021 to today, and what you actually have is this period of time where multiple countries who had engaged in fighting the Houthis in Yemen, who were also allies to the United States, had made claims and filed reports and grievances against the United States in the UN for the U.S. de-escalating or removing them off of the terrorist watch list. So most specifically, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, actually created multiple source documents, multiple case studies, trying to get the United States to reclassify the Houthis as terrorists from 2021 to 2023, but that never happened. Instead, the Biden administration stood by their discovery that they did not determine that the Houthis were terrorists, and it was also an opportunity for the U.S. to be able to pour more humanitarian aid into Yemen to try to resolve the crisis of their ongoing civil war. Now, here we are in 2024, and on February 16th, 2024, new legislation will be passed that will designate the Houthis yet again in the eyes of the United States as a terrorist group, but a different designation. Remember, the first designation was Foreign Terrorist Organization, or FTO. The second designation is actually known as Specially Designated Global Terrorist, SDGT, a different designation that has different implications. So the SDGT, Specially Designated Global Terrorist Designator, that's going under the Houthis, effective immediately February 16th, 2024, is part of an executive order that can be dictated by the president. Yes, President Biden, the same president who took the terrorist name away from the Houthis in 2021, is now redesignating them in a different category as terrorists. And now, what does FTO do differently than SDGT? So the SDGT designation actually specifically makes it so that the United States and its allies can target the financial support of the Houthis. It's very much a piece of legal jargon that makes it so that American dollars and American people, American resources, American interests cannot financially support in any way, shape, or form Houthis. So it gives the United States government a chance to lock up any money that the United States controls, any U.S. dollar denominations that can be tied back to Houthi leaders, Houthi leadership, or support elements supporting the Houthi. Who is the United States really targeting with this? Not Yemenis. It is targeting Iranians, because it understands that Iran is the primary support group supporting the Houthis. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is that the designation of specially designated global terrorists that the United States is adding to the Houthis still does not give the United States the legal coverage that it needs to be able to carry out kinetic strikes, actual missiles and bombs dropped on Houthi rebel sites like we're seeing right now in Yemen. And because the United States and the UK, in their joint efforts to attack Houthis in Yemen, doesn't have a strong legal foundation, we've actually seen in the last few days that China and Russia have filed claims with the UN to protect the Houthis against airstrikes from the US and the UK. So we actually have a situation here where the US is potentially carrying out some sort of illegal activity in using US military forces, both in the Red Sea and air forces and air resources, to attack Houthi sites in Yemen, basically because there is no legal justification for why the US would use military resources to attack a group inside of Yemen when there is no stated war and when the Houthis are not considered an FTO, a foreign terrorist organization. So we have a very sticky situation happening here, and that's what the world is confused about when it comes to Yemen. Because if the Houthis are not considered terrorists by the United States, why is the United States attacking Houthis in Yemen? More so, if it's a violation of UN Security Council guidelines for the United States to be carrying out attacks in Yemen, which according to Russia and China now, 2 of the 5 seats on the permanent UN Security Council, according to those 2 countries, what the United States and the UK are doing in Yemen is not legal. So now we have a situation where the United States intentionally did not designate the Houthis as foreign terrorist organization. However, they are still carrying out kinetic strikes against the Houthis in Yemen in an act that could be deemed illegal by the UN, and that grievance has been claimed by 2 of the United States' most significant counterparts, China and Russia. Interestingly enough, China and Russia are also close allies with Iran, both economically and militarily. So you see how we are in a very confusing place right now, where at the end of the day, it has been confirmed by the US president that Yemen does not threaten US national security, otherwise the Houthis would be considered an FTO organization. However, our troops that are in the Red Sea are very much in danger as they carry out these actions, these attacks against the Houthis in Yemen. So, in a nutshell, really, I'm just as confused as I was when I started this conversation, right? Why the hell is the United States executing military strikes against a Houthi rebel group that we won't designate a foreign terrorist organization, but we will say in public media is acting as a terrorist group, and our allies also support calling the Houthis terrorists, but yet we will not take that step? I don't understand why. If calling the Houthis a terrorist group would legitimize all of our military actions in the Middle East, we should take that step. If they are not a terrorist organization, we should not be attacking them and claiming that they are terrorists or that the attacks are counterterrorism in nature. Unfortunately, we are stuck in a place where we just don't want to call the conflict that we have in Yemen a conflict against Iran. And that is exactly what this conflict is, because Iran is ultimately the supporter of not just the Houthis, but also Hamas, the force that is inciting violence in Israel. So we are in a strange sort of geopolitical dance, a chess match that the whole world can see thanks to the modern information age, and there is no really good solid footing for President Biden or the current administration to stand on to defend their actions. This is a place where the United States needs to just show a little bit of backbone and say, we are going to attack the Houthi. We are going to do it because we believe in protecting maritime trade in the Red Sea, and because what the Houthis are doing to attack commercial vessels with aid going to Israel goes against American interests. Let's just call it what it is. We don't need to hide behind the monikers of terrorist or foreign terrorist group or specially designated global terrorist. We don't need to hide behind any of that. We're the United States. If something threatens our interests or our allies, we should come out and call it what it is. And if that means that it escalates into a larger Middle Eastern conflict, then we should be ready for that larger Middle Eastern conflict because we believe it matters to American interests. Now, here's the real problem. If it's not that important to American interests, we shouldn't do it. So if the fact that the Yemeni Houthis are blocking trade in the Red Sea that's supporting Israel, if that does not directly affect American lives, we shouldn't be involved. This is the hard question that unfortunately our administration, in its incredible polar division, doesn't seem to want to address. We should be involved in things that affect Americans. We should not be involved in things that don't affect Americans. Is there a gray space in between? Of course there is, but that's where we should put 90% of our effort, is in trying to better define and reduce that gray area so that we don't run the risk of putting American lives at risk for a conflict that doesn't really matter to us. I would have hoped that we learned this lesson in Vietnam. I would have hoped that we learned this lesson in Korea. I would have hoped that we learned this lesson in Afghanistan. But it seems like we are still struggling to understand this very simple lesson. If Americans are going to benefit from the safe passage in the Red Sea, and I don't mean benefit because we're going to get our shit off of Amazon a little bit cheaper. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, if national security interests are served served by fighting the Houthis, then we need to fight the Houthis. If American interests are not being served, but maybe Israeli interests are being supported, maybe we shouldn't be fighting the Houthis. This is the kind of conversation that we should be having. This is as simple as geopolitics gets. Thank you very much for your time. Make sure that you visit our sponsor in the link below. Take a moment to see whether or not Aura would be a good fit for you, and keep asking yourself the hard questions that apparently our federal government is having a difficult time asking itself.